All right, spoilers everyone for Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Fiona, I'm not going to do any Shakespearean impressions or quotes. I'm not going to do the opening prologue.
Wherefore art thou, Romeo? Come on.
That is not happening.
That's a real disappointment, John, I'm going to say. Why do a podcast about Romeo and Juliet if we get no lines?
I'm not the person to be doing this. Where's Marcus when you need him? He would.
Well, he would actually. Oh my God. Yeah, that's true.
Welcome everyone to another episode of The Script Department. I'm joined by Fiona to continue our discussion of all things Bazmataz. Do you own that quote? Do you own that expression?
I don't. I wish I did. I really wish I did. I might try. Well, no, that's wrong. I'm not into plagiarism, but I really wish I did own it. But yeah, it's a great one, isn't it? Bazmataz. I heard it. I think it was someone who he was being interviewed for Elvis, and it was in an interview. I think a journo said it to him, or someone said it to him there. Yeah, it's excellent. Anyway.
It's become my favorite word.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, this week we are looking at Romeo and Juliet. Before we take a trip to Verona Beach, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes like this. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for 100+ discussions about cinema, television, even a few games thrown in for good measure. That's 100+ since January. And if you want to support the channel, why not kick us a few bucks so we can buy a coffee? You'll find all the links in the description. Fiona, we've talked about Gatsby, Elvis, and Strictly Ballroom. Now we're on to the film that arguably made Baz Luhrmann a Hollywood name.
True.
What's your memory of first watching this film?
Right. So my memory of watching this film was I was given a DVD for Christmas one year, and it was, I don't know how long after it came out, but when I went through school and through uni, and in my early teens, I was a real Shakespeare dork. Like, I really was so into Shakespeare. I still am. I still love it, but I was a real sort of purist, love Shakespeare. So I watched this and yeah, I kind of liked it, but I didn't like it as much as I hoped I would, for no other reason than probably, it's set in Verona Beach, and rather than Verona in Italy. And, I grew up by the beach. And it sounds really weird, but my love for Shakespeare was about all the old English, European, ancient stuff. So I just didn't get excited about the Verona stuff at all. It was like, the beach thing, it just didn't do it for me. So I was like, I've got this scene. Give me the authentic stuff, So yeah, I think that was it. How about you?
I cannot remember when I first saw it, but I do have memories of the film. I was watching it again today, and I did have kind of flashbacks of watching it that first time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how I feel about this film. I don't have memories of what I felt about it the first time. Only that I thought it was highly stylized and quite kind of golden pistols and all these like very cool costumes, and just like the petrol station blowing up and everything. It is not what you think of when you think of Shakespeare, is it? And so
no, not at all.
I just remember feeling quite surprised by that. But watching it again today, I did feel that there was a clumsiness to this film that And I there's some really interesting moments in it, but there are moments as well where I think you didn't properly develop that right. aspect of the world you've built. He's built this new world. Verona Beach is clearly Venice Beach, and which I like, because Venice, Italy, and it's he's found ways to kind of create logical connections to Los Angeles, and I like that. But there's also aspects to this where it just doesn't work. Like, there's this fleet of helicopters at the beginning that like are flying through the city and all that. And and there's these two giant skyscrapers with the names on them, and I'm like, is this? I don't believe any of this, and I know that's kind of the point, and I know that's what Baz Luhrmann tries to go for with his red curtain cinema approach, which we discussed in our Strictly Ballroom talk, which is, he's creating something that is strictly cinematic, that couldn't possibly exist outside of cinema. But that doesn't mean that you get a free pass either to just make things messy either. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know it might be sounding a bit strict or a bit harsh there, but that was kind of my feeling on it. Do you like this film?
Well, it's interesting because having watched it again just recently, I actually enjoyed it way more than I remember it. So that was kind of interesting, and it made me think about how our our tastes change and how our kind of enjoyment changes over time. So that was kind of then. I think there's a whole podcast in that about how movies change over time. As you watch them again and again, but yeah, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it this last time. Still have some issues that now I can probably articulate a bit better than I could back then. But overall, I actually did enjoy it. And I think the key thing for me, as I'm always there, one talking about feeling and wanting to be emotionally moved in films, I actually still felt the great, brilliant thing about this film was right at the outset, Shakespeare tells you in the very first line, in the very first lines, what is going to happen. Two young people are going to die, right? Right before you know anything else. And then still at the very end, that final scene, or the nearly the end, where there's Romeo and Juliet in the church and they take the poison, I still wanted Juliet to wake up in time to get Romeo before he took the poison. Like, really, I was watching going, oh, come on. And I thought, my God, I'm still feeling like that. So that is a testament to the writing.
Yeah.
But also, like, you got to give it to him for all the fluff and for all the moments where, we have our issues with Baz. He managed to get, with that couple, he's managed to build, for me at least, that emotional connection where I really wanted the ending to be different to what I knew it was going to be, So that was great, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been much of a student, or rather, I've never been a good student of Shakespeare. And it is one of my regrets, actually, that I've never. I would love to take a real proper course on Shakespeare. I totally appreciate Shakespeare. Whenever I am exploring any of Shakespeare's works, I am like, what, I get this, and I've had really great conversations with scholars about Shakespeare in the past. Like, right, tell me why he's the legend, tell me why he is the writer. And I'm always just excited, by the promise of sitting down and really studying these texts. And my knowledge is very much a surface knowledge, which I really need to rectify. I really do. Maybe this episode and I will be enough. The hate in the comments will probably be enough to make me change all this.
Maybe.
But I mean, everybody knows Romeo and Juliet. So I'm going into this, as familiar as everybody else. You don't have to be a scholar to know how this is going to go.
Yeah.
And I still found myself getting very emotionally connected. I loved the scene where they meet for the first time.
Oh, we have to talk about that. We have to have a moment because that is such a great scene.
It is, yeah, it is. And I loved the opening the opening sequence, the over the top opera music, the smash cut to all the different people of interest, the news headlines and everything. One really interesting point: the opening sequence, that opening speech that the newscaster gives, that then is then mirrored by Pete Postlethwaite, I think, it's his character, and then it's done again through the newspaper headlines and text on screen. That is that iconic opening prologue of the play, or opening narration is done 3 times in the space of like 3 minutes, maybe, or 4 minutes, or something like that, 2 minutes even. It's a really interesting opening sequence, and it is a spectacle. It really is. I'm imagining in 1996 watching that on the big screen would have been a loud, mind-blowing spectacle. I have never seen this before.
Definitely.
I've never seen Shakespeare like this.
Yes, definitely. It was definitely out of the box. And there's some funny little moments where all the way through where you kind of feel like I'm very conscious that Baz is conscious that he's doing a big thing. It's like that moment where Mercutio gives Romeo the ecstasy tablet.
Yeah.
And, that made me laugh when I watched it just this last time because, it was all like, oh, and, it was on that wonderful speech, which is, it comes in the shape of a agate stone, the forefinger, and alderman, that thing, which is great, that speech, which is lovely. And it's a beautiful moment to use that ecstasy tablet. But I love the way I felt like they were like, "Ooh, look at us. Look at how outrageous we're being." It kind of had that sort of feel to it, which kind of made me laugh now that I look at it because we're 25 years down the track and those sorts of things are less amazing to, we're just like whatever. But you could tell it was new and I kind of liked that. There was he was showing off in his bravery, if you like, which I thought was kind of funny, but good.
You're the expert here. How different is this? I mean, not in terms of its setting or anything like that. How many liberties has Baz Luhrmann taken with the
dialogue?
Not even just that, but just like the structure of the story itself. Obviously, he's made this 2-hour movie, but has he written new lines for this, or is it literally just is there a rule here that if it's not in the play, it doesn't get put in this film?
Yeah, I think, look, I don't know exactly because I'm not, I know a bit about Shakespeare, but I'm not an expert. But I think it seemed to me to be very, very close to the true script, the original script. Obviously, there were bits in it where they've added little moments to kind of make the contemporary setting make sense. Not much though. There are a few little things like the Capulets had first names, which they don't in in the play, and like the parents or whatever. So there are a few like little things that were extra, but I don't think he took from my knowledge, he didn't take massive liberties with massive structure changes or text changes at all, which is actually one of the strengths, I think, to this film, that he's managed to retain the originality, the greatness of the writing, but bring it to life in such a unique way, which then opens that story up to people who would never watch Shakespeare and ordinarily, or, whole new audiences and all those great things that good writing and good filmmaking do. So from that point of view, so I thought, that was real strength. But I don't know, and maybe in the comments, probably people will tell us.
Exactly. No, the reason I asked is because I am fascinated by that kind of filmmaking where there is a slavish devotion to the source text, and it in some cases can make for a really great film. Sometimes it can be a film that people just kind of ask, why bother? And I'm thinking about the 1997 Psycho that Gus Van Sant made. And this, I remember it, Psycho is one of my favorite films. This is definitely one of those films where you can watch it and you can get stuff out of it, but you can also ask yourself, why
bother?
Why just do it exactly like that? I love that Romeo and Juliet is not exactly like that. I loved like everything, like I said, the outlandishness of the setting and the costumes and so on, these gangs, and it's really great. But there were parts of me, I think, or parts of the film where I was watching it and thinking, this isn't quite working for me, or it's not quite landing for me. There's the moment where she says, "Where art thou, Romeo?" and he's talking right behind her as she's saying this. And I'm like, you're doing this because it was probably obviously in the source.
Yeah. Those theatrical.
But it's like, this isn't making for a very, I don't know, a coherent moment. It was a part of me like that wanted to, and I know you can argue, well, that's the line.
Yeah.
He's supposed to say, but I don't care if that's what he said on stage or if that's what they said, a few hundred years ago. I want the filmmaker to be adapting this.
Right.
How do you feel about, like, it's an adaptation? It doesn't have to be slaves.
Yeah.
Do you feel there are parts of this film that suffer because of that? And when I say, by the way, that I really do mean just a few moments for me personally that just kind of jarred with my immersion in the scene.
Yeah.
But did you find that there are as a self-professed Shakespeare nerd, are there moments that you thought, I'm so glad they didn't change that, or actually I wish they had changed that, you know?
Yeah, no, I think probably what I found was the because it does raise a question around adaptation again, and I think that's a really interesting kind of whole other conversation, particularly around Shakespeare and Shakespeare films, and I also love the fact that this adaptation happened, that it was set where it was set, that it was changed so markedly, and again, you know, goes back to a testament to the brilliance of the source material and also the brilliance of the story, the themes, you know, the desire for love, the desire for justice, the desire for revenge, all those sorts of things that, you know, like filmically storytelling, they're just such great fodder, you know. So the fact that it lands almost in anyone's hands, adapting it almost anyway. I mean, who doesn't want to write a script like that? You know, like we all want to write those stories, you know. So I thought it was brilliant from that point of view. And there are actually, I found more, rather than feel like things that I wish that he hadn't done. I actually really liked a couple. I felt that the value that was added through the cinematic version really added, and particularly two particular points. And one was the fish tank scene, which I still think is one of the best. You know, if you use the romantic comedy genre, I know it's not a romantic comedy, but the meet cute moment, you know, like that is just sensational. And it's just, you know, watching it again, it was like, this is a timelessly brilliant moment of two protagonists, or to, you know, the leading couple, the tragic couple meeting was beautiful. It's just, and it still has all of the magic that it had at the beginning. So I thought that was excellent. And the other thing that I think was served actually a bit better in Baz's version was that moment where Mercutio says that very famous line, "A plague on both your houses," when everyone starts to be, when Tybalt is killed and then Mercutio is stabbed. And I thought the way that Baz created that total sort of almost thematic change from that sort of into this desire for revenge theme that kind of comes out was absolutely brilliant. It just, the storm clouds roll in, the whole movie changes tonally, and it's just, and off that one line, you know, and just that, and the strength of the performance really like landed it. And but I just thought that was brilliant. So I sort of felt there were more things that were like, oh, that actually worked really well, than things that I was like, The only things I didn't really like were some of the characters. So I always get the Capulets and Montagues mixed up. So the Capulet, Mrs. Capulet, so was, I thought she was the characterization of her was very, very over the top. In fact, well, a lot of the secondary characters were, in a way, when they're very over the top, very cartoonish almost. But I felt that really didn't. That was the one role that really didn't serve the script, I felt, because there was really no relationship between her and Juliet through it. Well, it wasn't really conveyed in the film. It wasn't massively strong in the theatre, the stage play, but you know, I thought it missed a bit there. And then the only other thing, sorry, I know I'm ranting.
No.
The only other one was the only other bit I think maybe wasn't served quite as well was the opening sequence. I know you said you really loved it, and while I loved it visually, and the spectacular of the guys in the service station and it blowing up and shooting and all that stuff, it as a way in, so, you know, like the filmmaker has to bring the audience into the storytelling, you know, and we kind of need some help with Shakespeare to get there a bit, right? Because it's the language is foreign for us, particularly at the beginning. And I just felt that that opening scene, with the way those characters were kind of over the top and loud, like really, really loud, and you couldn't really hear the dialogue.
Yeah.
And actually, in a way, it didn't matter, because you got the essence of this is a bunch of thugs, essentially, you know, and you got that really loud and clear, and you got sort of what was going on. But just as a sort of coming into the film, I felt that it was a bit of a clunky. I felt we were kind of thrown into the film a bit. We weren't sort of eased into the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do think so. I think there were three moments for me that kind of threw me. Mm-hmm. The first, I know, and I agree with you. It was the first time that the characters start talking in the car, and it's Jamie Kennedy, who you just can't take seriously as an actor in a Shakespearean film. Like, no, nothing against him, but he's a comedian. He's he does his prank shows and things like that. He's not what you would consider, an actor that is going to, cite Shakespeare all day long. And you've got. It did feel that these were actors who, I think when I'm watching it, I'm like, this doesn't feel like it's natural to you. And I'm reminded of this is a weird comparison, but there's the Tom Cruise movie Valkyrie, which is a fine film, but it's all set in Germany during the Second World War,
that's right.
and it's Tom Cruise, who's not German, obviously, but they're all speaking German at the beginning. And then very quickly it fades into English. Like the language kind of just transfers into English.
Oh, interesting.
And I've seen this done in other ways where characters will be speaking a language and the filmmaker will find this very clever way of just translating it, of morphing the scene into English, for example, or letting us know that, hanging a lantern on the fact that maybe the language is changing here slightly.
Yeah, gotcha.
And I think the story could have done with that a little bit, because at the beginning, I know it kind of sounds sacrilegious to say, but I would have probably had them, when they're yelling in the car and all that, which is not, I don't know if that kind of language works for a group of kids essentially blasting guns in the air while driving through the streets. I don't know if it fits that particular type of action. And I think I would have had them almost, just perform, behaving in a more natural way, as if this wasn't a Shakespearean film.
Right. So like including the dialogue, like
And then when Tybalt arrives, because you can believe, you totally believe that John, I'm trying to remember all the names here, John Leguizamo would be able to, he could pull this off, no problem.
Yeah.
And he does pull this off amazing.
Yeah.
I want him then starting to speak like Shakespeare is directing this film.
Yeah, right.
And then everyone else adapts to that.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And now we've been lured into this. Whereas I do feel like Baz Luhrmann is throwing the audience into the deepest possible end of the pool here.
Yeah.
And you are watching, like, I know what I'm getting into with this film. And I do feel like there's a part of me that I need to adjust to it. And I'm thinking I need the subtitles here a little bit.
Yeah.
And
just initially.
But you can, just initially. That's my point, is that you adapt to it very quickly. Yeah. It's like, when I was watching The Wire, for the first season of The Wire, you're so deep in with these gangs in The Wire, and they're all speaking in this, they're using this kind of local slang that's so alien to the kind of the life that most of us live. We're not dealing drugs on the streets or, involved in that kind of crime or anything. And so there's all this kind of slang and language being used to describe the different types of jobs that they have to do. And there's all these codes that they're using and stuff like that. It takes a while to get used to that. It takes a while to get, as it would be for, just being dropped into any community or anything,
Definitely.
You go get dropped into Cork and you won't understand half of what people are saying. Everybody says Absolutely. When they really mean no, and
totally. Yeah, it's a thing about one world into another world, right?
Exactly. And I feel like easing us in a very clever way where the audience will be like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. May have just tweaked that. Anyway, that was just one point. But that's
a great idea. I love that idea. And actually, because what that would have done with Tybalt is that would have done two things. Well, it lets the audience kind of come into the story in a gentle way, but also from Tybalt's point of view, it positions Tybalt as the really powerful member of that friendship group, which he was. So yeah, really good.
But it's just there are some actors in this film who probably had to work harder than others to step into the Shakespearean character.
Yeah.
And Tybalt, John Leguizamo, is definitely one who you can almost feel was born with Romeo and Juliet, a printout in his hand,
Yeah.
He's such a phenomenal actor. And I just think he could have been like that that tunnel into it. I don't know. That's just me.
I think there was a moment there in that opening sequence where when he first sort of turned up and he was kind of standing sort of side on, he had a touch of the Scott Hastings about him, I have to say.
Yes, I was just.
Did you notice that? It was a bit of that. I'm
totally.
like, man, if you had the bolero jacket on, we would be doing
Yeah.
for sure. It was really quite funny. And I thought maybe I've been watching too many Baz Luhrmann films, but there was definitely a bit of a something there.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up Strictly Ballroom. So when I was watching, if you go back to our talk about Strictly Ballroom, it's not a complaint I had, but it was just an observation I had, which is that it moves very quickly, that film. It's like suddenly they've met each other, suddenly they're partners, suddenly they're falling for each other, and it's very, you don't even have time for a meet cute, like, I don't think there is a good meet cute in Strictly Ballroom. It's just, which is probably for the best, but we're rushing at lightning speed, and I did feel that with this film as well. I felt, he's met her, it's love at first sight in the literal sense, and boom, they're kissing, and now he's proposing to her that night, it feels like, and it is that night, I'm thinking, is it?
Yeah, it is. I think that's the joy of Shakespeare, though, isn't it? And I think that's because that's one of this play's biggest, the kind of people laugh at it so much, is that they hardly knew each other. They're getting married and they hardly knew each other. But yeah, it does. It's like Strictly Ballroom on steroids, isn't it?
Exactly, and it is like that whole other level. Yeah. And then when I look at Gatsby, which we talked about, the interesting thing about Gatsby is they already had their love story prior to the film starting.
That's right.
And so when it happened in true to Baz Luhrmann style, as soon as DiCaprio walks in the door of the love interest's house, I can't remember her name.
Daisy.
Daisy, yeah. As soon as he walks into the house, soaking wet, they're just in each other's arms again. And it's like they've picked up where they left off. And now you could argue that he's moving lightning fast with that relationship too, but they had the backstory. And it does feel like this is a film where this is like the middle ground for three love stories. One that just happens in lightning speed. One which gets away with it because we know there's a legend around this story.
Yeah.
Like
they have history.
There's a mountainous kind of reputation for this story. So we accept it. We don't question it.
Yeah.
And then with Gatsby, because we may question that, there's a backstory. Now, I know that was in the book as well, but he's picked there's 3 movies in his catalog that all suffer from the same problem, but they all have their solutions in different ways for that problem.
Yeah.
Because in Strictly Ballroom gets away with it because of the dancing montages. Montage is the key. And why would you have a montage? Because they're dancing, they're training, they're practicing. It's like Rocky. So you can get through the love, Rocky can get through the training quickly because he's got a montage. And Scott Hastings can get through the love story side of things quickly because he's got a montage.
He's got a montage.
Romeo doesn't have one, but he's got Shakespeare at his back, so he's okay. He can do whatever he wants. And then in Gatsby, they had a backstory, and so it's just, I don't know. I just find it. I was watching it and thinking, I feel like I'm watching the almost like the teenage version of Gatsby, literally, because it's Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah,
and the kind of the more reputable version of Strictly Ballroom, if that makes sense.
God, that's a really interesting analogy. I'd never thought about that, but now you mention it, it does make total sense. It's
like,
really
you can imagine a box set. I know the box sets for Baz Luhrmann have probably been, was it Moulin Rouge, Romeo and Juliet, and whatever else?
Oh, what was the other one? Moulin Rouge, Romeo and Juliet, and
there would have been a trilogy box.
There was a trilogy box, yeah.
But if there is a trilogy, it's Strictly Ballroom, Romeo and Juliet, and Great Gatsby.
Well, yes, from that point of view, for fast-moving love affairs, definitely.
Yeah. For fast-moving love affairs, that sometimes end well and sometimes don't.
But it's interesting, now mentioning that point about the pace of their romance. One of the things I did notice in this film, as compared to perhaps the stage version, is I felt that the razzmatazz, again, of the surrounding story, the feuding families, almost at times eclipsed the kind of tragic love affair in this film as compared to other versions I've seen where it's theatre versions, where the love story, tragic though it may be, really pulls through as the kind of primary storyline. But I kind of felt a bit with this. I think it was because it was so exciting that the way you'd built again, the kind of over the top building of the world, which is amazing and such a spectacle. But there were a couple of minutes or a couple of moments where I was like, gosh, you could almost get rid of Romeo and Juliet and just run this story, like this feuding family thing without this. It's almost like it was reversed and it was like the B story, it was kind of, interesting. Yeah. Which I didn't think was great, because I felt that actually the strength of the emotional narrative was definitely through the
I completely agree with you. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and you saying it there now fixed that for me.
There you go. That's
the love story is the B story in so many films, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Screenwriting tip: have the love story as your B story, because the B story isn't the poor cousin to the main story. The B story is where you will make us cry. It's where you'll make us actually really care about characters.
Yeah.
And it's the journey they go on in the B story that will allow them to be able to do better in their A story.
Yeah.
I would say that if Frodo and Sam weren't tested as friends on their journey, that ring wouldn't have been. He wouldn't have carried Frodo up the mountain.
There you
so
go.
You've got to. You've really got to let, don't be afraid to let your B stories grow love story wise, and allow characters to really tear themselves down and bare their souls.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes it can be thought of as a cliche in movies, but it works for a reason. And it's so funny. It works in this movie.
It does.
But it shouldn't be the B story.
No, it should not be the B
really
story. No, it shouldn't. And it's really kind of, again, like you go back to what is the script doing? What was happening in that script that meant that it was like that? Was it just in the production phase? Was it just in the direction? Or how was the script structured to allow that to happen? I don't know whether it was a decision. It felt to me like structurally it was pretty bang on, and it certainly felt to me like dialogue wise it was absolutely on. But I don't know. Be interesting to see.
Okay. You can have all the, great quotes at the beginning about two families and telegraphing the ending and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't set the right tone when the first thing we see are a gang driving around in a car and then having a shootout with Tybalt and blowing up a petrol station. And then later coming into, that's what the film becomes then. And also when you're showing us two giant skyscrapers and also, I mean, the most kind of, the scene I was most glued to, I think, was the duel with Tybalt, Romeo and Mercutio.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a really great scene. And then Mercutio's death, which that was the other scene I was going to get to. That threw me a little bit. Is he's clearly not been stabbed because he's talking away no problem, and it's a bit over. That was where the kind of the devotion to the writing, to the source, seemed to clash with the cinematic quality, because either he's just been stabbed in the lung.
Well, it was kind of low down, wasn't it? It was almost like his appendix. It was kind of, and it
whatever.
It was kind of, it was not, and it was not bleeding. There was no blood.
Yeah, there was no blood.
Weird.
It was a bit. It was like, okay, if this is enough to kill him, he's not going to be quoting Shakespeare,
he's not going to be saying a plague on both your houses because he's going to still be around to, be friends with them some more.
And so I would have preferred. I don't know. I don't know how you do it, but it's just one of those moments where the cinematic adaptation didn't always click for me. But I love that scene. I did love that scene. And to me, those scenes were the most really fascinating scenes for me. Maybe because I'm more familiar with the Romeo and Juliet side of things, as opposed to the Mercutio Tybalt. Nobody talks about Tybalt as much as they talk about Romeo and Juliet, do they?
That's true.
So
that's true.
So maybe I was more interested in that for a reason, but I did feel, I felt like that clash of ideas and that clash of characters was the A story of this movie.
Yeah. I wonder
And
if it was deliberate. Do you think it was? Maybe
it
it
could be,
was.
it could be. But if it does, it brings me to an issue that I have in general, and that is, I didn't feel like that rivalry. Maybe you've mentioned this already, forgive me, but
No.
I didn't feel that rivalry between families, A, mattered, or B, had any real weight to it. Maybe it's that I'm spoiled now with things like Succession, and Game of Thrones has probably ruined everything for us in terms of like rival families and all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't feel like these were rival families. I didn't get any sense that there was a real dangerous kind of gang war happening here. And if there was, why was there a gang war? Is this a business rival? Like, I in this world that Baz Luhrmann has created, I just had more questions than answers about the mechanics of the city.
Yeah.
And like, there's a moment where, I know it's probably not important, and Baz Luhrmann's probably rolling his eyes right now if he's listening to this, but there's a moment where Mercutio is shooting his gun into the sea, just randomly, haphazardly, and nobody could care on the beach, and you just think, is that allowed? Is that okay? Because I'm just wondering here what the name of the game is,
Yeah. And also because between the two families, there was really only about, you're only looking at about 6 characters, or, the kind of 2 or 3 main characters, or family characters on either side that were involved in this warring family. If you compare it to another Shakespearean adaptation with West Side Story, and the 2 gangs there were gangs, like at least, they managed to create a good sense of street rivalry, most definitely. A different kind of, different sort of setup completely. But,
but I didn't, as much as I liked West Side Story, I really liked the Spielberg adaptation, but I didn't buy Ansel Igor as this guy who came out of prison and was the bad apple of this gang.
Too
like
slick.
Way too nice. And you could make it be a case where he was wrongfully jailed or something like that, or he took a bullet for somebody else or whatever, which may have been the story. I don't know. I can't remember. But I just remember thinking, I don't believe you could ever hurt a fly. And that's fine. That's okay. You can still have that movie without him having to be a tough guy. But I didn't buy him as a tough guy. And in this, I didn't buy DiCaprio as being. I bought him as the heartbroken guy and the lovelorn, the love.
The poet.
He's been struck. Yeah, he's been struck by Cupid's arrow. I bought all that completely, and there's no question in my mind DiCaprio was cast perfectly in that film. He was cast perfectly in Titanic and all. He is a Hollywood megastar for a reason. He can adapt so brilliantly into these roles. I could never imagine him as being the guy who can wield a gun well in this film. And so again, it's that same problem of, is he meant to be a member of this gang? Is he meant to be a tough guy? Because I don't see it in this film. I see the guy who will bare his soul, the poet, as you say. I see the guy that she fell in love with. Claire Danes, by the way, never gets enough credit in this film.
Oh my God, absolutely. She's brilliant, isn't she? She's like personifies the character of Juliet absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah. And she you can see why this guy, it was love at first sight. Like, she has this beautiful smile, and she just captures the audience's heart. Like, totally.
She does. But I think going back to DiCaprio, I think his character is supposed to be that little misfit. That sort of, he's the kind of, he's the opposite of the black sheep. They're all black sheep except him. He is the poet. He is the one that is the outsider, and that's the kind of irony, is that the outsider ends up, well, not the outsider. He's not an outsider in the family. But the one that has the gentler soul is the one that ends up inflicting the damage that ends up this sort of string of tragic events because of the environment he's in. And it's that like love versus hate, and the, and he's the symbol of love in that family, but there is so much of the opposing emotion in the family and the characters that it overwhelms him and all that sort of stuff. So but I think you're right. He didn't.
In your sorry, I was just going to ask, in your mind then, does he fit into does the gang, the kind of LA gang creation that Baz has or version of this that he's created for this film to make this work, does DiCaprio fit into this in your mind?
Do you know, I think he does. And the reason I think he does is because of, if you look at the casting of those other roles, I mean, I get what you're saying about the comedians, but you look at Mercutio, a sort of a black sort of drag queen or whatever, kind of the whole, that, I mean, fantastic. Ordinarily we see Mercutio as an old white guy or an older white guy, so it's so fantastic to see that diversity. So I kind of think, and it was a bit of an oddball collection, and even the fact that the other characters were all a bit weird. They none of them fit the mold of a traditional gangster.
Yeah.
Certainly on the Montague side, I think they did a bit more on the Capulet side, but with like Tybalt, I think he was a bit more, fit into that kind of mold of what you'd expect from a kind of gangstery character. But I quite liked that from the Montague side. I thought that kind of disconnect is actually the way he did fit in, because I think if the others were more traditional gangster, he would have been really on the outside, and you might not have bought it at all that he would be part of that family. But then both of them, Juliet was also, vastly different to the rest of the family, and that she's all in white, she's a symbol of innocence and purity of love and all that sort of stuff, and why they find each other, and the idea that hopefully that the strength of pure love will overcome evil and hate, and it doesn't, and that's why you get the big speech at the end, which is kind of to shock us all and say, be better humans or whatever.
I think I've seen it done well in cinema, where you can have gang members and you can have what they would call civilians, and they're able to be in the same room. They're able to hang out, but and you can have the civilian get drawn in, but you can see that they're out of their depths.
Yeah.
And I feel like a better exploration of the Montagues and of what their lifestyle, of what their life is like, and have DiCaprio as a civilian who is close to people in the group, or he's the guy who shouldn't be tagging along, and kind of, I don't know, flesh it out a little bit more what this group dynamic is. I think might have helped me with that a little bit more. Right. But then I'm dwelling on this, but I completely forgot about that once the Romeo and Juliet story starts.
Yeah.
Because then I stopped caring about who these groups are, but until that point, that was my interest in this story, was figuring out the economics of this world.
Yeah.
And I do wish that a little bit more attention had been paid to that.
Yeah, look, I definitely agree that the family conflict broadly wasn't particularly well structured, but I do think that was a bit of a testament to when this piece was written, because I think you're absolutely right. I think your point about Succession and all those, multi-series shows where you get to deep dive into the psychology of the patriarch and all those sorts of things. We just don't, consume. We just consume so differently now. And I think it's a bit of that because, but I do agree. It wasn't, I don't think the relationships on either side of the family were particularly well constructed, but I think that was, that's more about the way it was written and when it was written than anything else. But
I forgot that Paul Sorvino was in this, and I was delighted to see him because he passed away recently, and it was and it was really wonderful just to be able to see him on screen again as a surprise, because that's the thing, isn't it? You so many great actors, you'll never get that moment of them appearing again, and it's nice to forget that people are in films, so they surprise you when they show up. And
it's true.
And so that like made me really want to watch more of these family dynamics, and I think that's part of what. And like I said, I've been spoiled completely by those other TV shows now. Yeah. So,
I think we all have, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't think it's a fault of the film.
Yeah.
I guess it's just looking at it from my own writing kind of wish list, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Final thoughts?
Look, yeah, better than I thought it was going to be. Liked it more the second, third, whatever, however many times I watch it. The most recent, I like it more. That's my summation. How about you?
I like it. I liked it. I think I have a better appreciation for it now after talking to you. And yeah, I'm hungry to see more Baz Luhrmann actually now. I still haven't seen Elvis, but I've
Oh
got it
my
now
God.
because it's out now, and I've got it, and I'm going to be watching it this weekend. So
Great.
maybe we'll do a quick little chat about it next week.
Yeah. Fab.
But
It's great.
cool.
And what's the next big Luhrmann we're going to look at?
I guess it has to be Moulin Rouge, doesn't it?
Oh gosh, of course it does. Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds fab.
Cool. All right, thanks Fiona, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, check out our socials, subscribe to the podcast, and support the channel. Links are in the description. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye.